Good evening. My name is John Henry, and I'm an alcoholic. In this Code Blue Big Book Action and Study seminar, we're going to go through the first 164 pages of the Big Book, the recovery section, and we're going to do the work that the first 100 people who recovered said we have to do to overcome this hopeless condition of mind and body. I borrow heavily from the Golden Slippers, from Joe and Charlie, from Clancy, and from all of the giants who have gone before me. Now, I don't claim to be any big book guru or any kind of top 10 spiritualist. I'm just a simple drunk. I was almost dead from the disease. When I finally became willing to do the action in our book, I was able to recover and have a pretty good life. So I'm hoping that there's 2s and 3s and 4s of you listening to this together. You're going to need a big book. I like the large print big book, highlighter and pen. I'm going to try to get some of the paperwork that I've got online. And please bring your willingness. Please bring your willingness and your open mind. And as you're going to see, we open every session with the set-aside prayer so that we may be more open to receiving this information. Thanks for listening. Good evening, everybody. I'm John. I'm an alcoholic. During the 1950s, a man by the name of Max C., now deceased, started a group in Winnipeg, Manitoba called the Golden Slippers. The group was a back to the basics of the big book kind of group, especially for those people who could not stay sober for any length of time. The group took a bunch of chronic slippers and walked them through the steps, taking the action exactly as laid out by the first 100 men and women who wrote the basic textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not your typical thanks for sharing kind of AA meeting, nor is it like any seminar. Participants are asked to do all 12 steps as laid out in our basic textbook. One or more of the people who have done this work before will be guides to lead you through the instructions in our basic textbook using a dictionary published at about the same time as the book Alcoholics Anonymous to help us better understand the directions as they were written by the first 100 men and women. We ask every participant to commit to the entire process. Though we read and study the AA Big Book, this group is not limited to members of AA. We who have participated in these groups before have come to understand that these sessions make us much better sponsors. We can now lead people through the steps exactly as given to us by those who have gone before, unfettered and unchanged. In addition to being a boot camp for sponsors, we also feel this is especially valuable to those who've been through some sort of treatment or rehab and have been, in effect, left off at step 3 or step 5. Recovery requires that we do all 12 steps. We recover in AA by taking the steps, and if we don't take the action as described in our basic textbook, we might not recover. These study and action sessions will guide you through the steps precisely as the first 100 men and women laid them down. These are back to the basic sessions, accepting the simple kit of spiritual tools that's been laid at our feet. So that's kind of the first thing that I do at every session. The second thing that we do, if you're able, one of the sheets I passed out is the set-aside prayer. So if you're able to get down on a knee, we as a group, we say the set-aside prayer to help us open up our minds. If you don't want to get down on a knee, that's absolutely fine. I've also written the set-aside prayer right here on the board, but you should have it on a sheet of paper. So, if anybody is able or willing to get down on a knee, go ahead, but you certainly don't have to. God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. Amen. All right, welcome everybody, and I'm going to be passing around the 7th tradition. Give if you can. If you can't, that's okay. What we do, now again, everything that we do here is suggested. I don't want to come off like I'm some sort of big book expert or anything else. I was dying from the disease, and I was sober for 6 months, and I was going to a meeting every night, but I was going insane, and I was thinking about possibly killing myself or maybe drinking myself to death, and that was at 6 months sober. And I ran into some fellas, and they said, well, there's another option for you. And I said, well, what is it? Because I'm going to AA, and AA doesn't work. And they said, well, have you ever been through the book, and have you ever done the work in the book? And I said, well, what's that? And because I didn't know. And they said, well, that's what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is. And at the time, I was so desperate that I said, you know what, man, I'll try anything. And I signed up for the Code Blue session. And it was to take place in 2 weeks, and those were the longest 2 weeks of my life. But I stayed sober for those 2 weeks, and when I walked across the threshold into the room, I suddenly felt as if everything was going to be okay. And I got to tell you guys, I showed up to every session. I snuck in, right after it started, and I left, right as it ended. And about halfway through, they said, whoever doesn't have a sponsor, raise their hand. And I was honest, and I raised my hand, and then I ran out of the building, and one of the fellas chased me down, and he brought me back in, and he said, this guy, Paris, is going to be your sponsor. And I looked over, and there's a kid 25 years younger than me, and I said, how long have you been sober? And it turns out he had been sober about the same amount of time as I had. And I'm like, what are they doing to me? But the difference was, he had done the work, and I hadn't done the work. He had had a spiritual experience, and because he had had that, he was able to help me. And again, thank God, I was so desperate and so afraid that I was willing to do anything. And I went through with it. And this fella, he heard my 5th step. We did our 6th and our 7th. He showed me how to do 8 and 9, and then how to practice 10 and 11, 12. And I got to tell you guys, my life changed. I had been a chronic relapser for 20 years. My first treatment, I think, was in 1988, and I had been through 9 treatments. And I got out of detox in 2011, and that's when I went through Code Blue, and my life changed. As soon as it was done, I wanted more, and I went through a second one. And then I went through a third one, and they had me greet people and do a little bit of the reading. And then I did a 4th one. There were 3 of us that kind of did it. And then I did a 5th one. It was me and another guy, and halfway through, this other guy bailed on me, so I finished it by myself. And I have been doing them ever since. This one is my 13th Code Blue. And in addition to doing, so basically, when I finish one, I do another. And in addition to this, I take people through the big book on an individual basis, because when I go through the book with you guys and I go through it with other people, I get to do these steps again myself, and I get to renew my life and my spirit. And it's just wonderful. And every time we do these, we go through the book, it's different because we're in a different spot. So, again, I don't want to come off like any kind of a big book guru. And if I say something and it's not in any of our literature, then it's my opinion, and you can take it or you can leave it, right? But if I'm talking about something that is in the book, particularly the program, some of the program steps and actions, then I recommend that you follow them to the letter, because these have been done by a couple of million people, and it has changed their life. So we're going to write a few things in our book. So, and they had me do this too. So everybody, open up to the front page. And again, this is just suggested. So what they had me do is they had me write my sober date at the top. Then they had me write my name and my phone number. Right? Because we got so much good stuff in here. If we forget our book at a meeting or a club, we're going to want somebody to call us to return it. So at the top of the page, write your sober date. And I got to tell you, I wrote that sober date up there, and there were a couple of nights when I was, it was pretty touch and go. And I opened up the book and I looked at that sober date and I said, "Dang it, I am not changing that date." So that kind of helped me out. And my name and my phone number, just in case you lose your book somewhere. So, and then underneath your name, I want you to write alcoholism and triple underline the ism, and then write not alcoholism and triple underline the wasm. You can spell that however you want. So, alcoholism, not alcoholism. Some of us, we go to a lot of meetings and we sober up and we think maybe we got this thing, right? Our book is going to teach us that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Underneath where it says Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have all my sponsees do this, and if you're willing to do it, I recommend it, but please write, are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol? And if it applies to you, you can write and drugs. Right? That applied to me, so I wrote them both. Are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol, and if it applies, and drugs? And then go ahead and sign it and date it. And the reason, I like to do this particularly with my sponsees, because our book is going to ask us to do some things, and when they say, well, I don't really think I have to do that, I always like to go back to that page and say, look here, look where you signed that. And I'm not going to ask anybody to do anything that I'm not going to do or that I haven't done, because I love to go through and do these steps with you guys as we do it. So, are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol and or drugs if it applies? Sign it and date it. I'm going to kind of use you as the canary in the coal mine here to make sure I don't go too fast. I'll watch.
Wow,
I've had a lot of coffee, so.
I can tell. Just kidding. Okay. What is the date today? The 20th.
Today is 9/20 of 2016.
Okay.
And then on the next page, right? Let's go to the next page. And this is just the most wonderful prayer in the world. So write the set-aside prayer under where it says 4th edition or 3rd edition, whatever you have. This is a prayer that I didn't understand. What does it mean? God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. Because when my first Code Blue that I went into, I knew everything. Now you guys have a copy of that too. It should be one of the papers up here, so you can copy it off of that sheet. But I thought that I knew everything, and what happens is when we do these steps, they tend to challenge, at least for me, it challenged lifelong conceptions and ideas and things that I knew for a fact. And as it turns out, most of the stuff that I thought I knew was wrong, right? And it was an amazing eye-opener when I went through this book. And every time I go through it again, I realize that there's so much more that I don't know that I think I do know. So it helps us to have an open mind, right? We're asking for God's help just to have an open mind. And again, I just want everybody to know that if I say something and it's not in this book, or it's not in the 12 by 12, or it's not in any of our literature, then it's my opinion. It's my opinion. And you can take it. You can take what you want and leave the rest if it's my opinion. But again, if it's the actions in the book, I'm going to recommend that if you're an alcoholic, I'm going to recommend that you do everything it says if you want to have a better life.
What's the 400?
What's the what?
Oh, you. Okay, I thought it was
You.
400.
That's my great writing. Yeah, that's a you.
Can't hear, can't
Yep.
see.
That does look like 400, by golly. Right, life in you so that I may be open to a new experience. Amen. And then when everybody's with that, we're going to shift over to the contents. What we're going to do today is we're going to do a little bit of the history. So we're going to go through the prefaces, and we're going to read everything right up to the doctor's opinion. So it's going to be a kind of a little brief history about AA, and we're going to kind of lay out where the steps are in the table of contents next. And then also, guys, I've got what I handed out to you guys. We've got kind of a syllabus here. If that's, I forget from college what it was called, but this tells what we're going to do each time. Okay? And this, when I read my little blurb at the beginning, it talked about a dictionary because the book was written in 1937 to 39. So these are some definitions that they felt the meanings have changed enough over time that this is the dictionary that I talked about, this little sheet right here. So it's got terms that might have changed their meaning over time. So, if everybody's done with that, let's go to the contents, which is Roman numeral V. Roman numeral V. And we're going to do a bracket. So let's bracket forward to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th edition. Do a little bracket and write brief history. Right? That's a brief history. Doctor's opinion. And again, if I'm going too fast, just tell me to slow down. Doctor's opinion, brief history, step 1. Bill's story, step 1. There is a solution. You know, it's actually 2, but I'm going to say 1 and 2. Steps 1 and 2. More about alcoholism. Steps 1 and 2. We agnostics. Step 2. How it works. 3 and 4. Into action. 5 through 11. Working with others. 12. And then we're going to do another bracket. To wives, the family afterward. To employers, a vision for you. And we're going to write practicing these principles in all our affairs. That's what chapters 8 through 11 are. Practicing these principles in all our affairs. And then at the bottom, a vision for you, we're going to add something else. I got a little arrow going down. A vision for you is also building a fellowship up around you. Building a fellowship up around you. That's just 11. When I came into these rooms, it was me, myself, and I. And now, you know, every friend that I have is a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, there's a group of 4 of us that still meet every Sunday mornings. And we meet to support each other, and we meet to give each other advice, and to see how our lives are going, and how we can help each other and other people, and how we can get closer to God. So a vision for you is building a fellowship up around you, as well as practicing these principles in all our affairs. All right, so let's go to XI. Preface. XI. So at the top of the page, we're going to write something. Let's write, meetings are for fellowship. Meetings are for fellowship. Program is for recovery. Meetings are for fellowship. Program is for recovery. And then I'm just going to read, and we're going to power through the history part of it here. This is the 4th edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats. Because this book has become the basic text, highlight the basic text. When I say highlight, underline, same difference. So highlight or underline that. And right next to it, off to the right, let's write textbook to be studied. Textbook to be studied. And my sponsor was a real advocate. He said, you know, when you go through this Code Blue and when you go to meetings, you take your book with you, because you're going to be talking about steps, and somebody's going to need some help at these meetings, and you're going to be able to flip it to the right page and help that person out. So, you know, before I went through Code Blue, I still, you know, if you want to hide something from an alcoholic, you know, if I hide some money, put it in the big book, right? Because we don't open the book very often. So, but this is a book that we should be studying. We should be taking it with us to all the meetings we go to, and with meetings, of course, with our sponsees and sponsors. So, because this book has become the basic text for our society. Now, circle the word society as well. And off to the left, let's write group can be a higher power. Right? Group can be a higher power. A lot of people come in and they've got a problem with God. Now, we're going to see that our book talks a lot about God. And so I'm going to say, for starters, the group can be a higher power to get us going. So society is capitalized. Whenever Bill talks about a deity or uses a word as a deity, he capitalizes it. And we're going to see that there's a lot of different terms for deities in this book. So group can be a higher power. Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Highlight the next 3 lines. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. So next to what we just highlighted, write first 164 pages. First 164 pages. And, you know, the reason that, thank heavens that how we humans are, man. We always think we can improve and change anything, right? Thank goodness we haven't changed it, and I think the reasons that we haven't changed it is because alcohol is the same. Alcohol has been the same for thousands of years. The bottles have changed, the names have changed, the strength has changed, but alcohol is still the same. Alcoholics are still the same. Alcoholics are still dying. They're still getting thrown in prison. They're still getting divorced. They're still getting fired. They're still crashing their vehicles. We're still doing all of those things that we've done for thousands of years. So alcoholics haven't changed. And then the third thing is human nature. Human nature never changes. Human nature has been the same for thousands of years. So that's why this book, a lot of people say, oh, this book is outdated, John. It doesn't, in the modern world, it has no meaning. And, I say that's utter nonsense because, again, alcohol hasn't changed, alcoholics haven't changed, and human nature never changes. That's why it works today just as well as it worked when it came off the press in 1939. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939, underlined by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth. So just underline 1939 and underline Dr. William D. Silkworth. And off to the right, we're going to write neurologist. That's okay if you misspell it. Neurologist treated over 50,000 alcoholics.
Is that Silkworth you were referring to?
Yep, Dr. William D. Silkworth is a neurologist, treated over 50,000 alcoholics. Our society's great medical benefactor. I think it's Neurologist, but I'm not sure. Yes. Neurologist treated over 50,000 alcoholics. The second edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and the directions for getting in touch with AA. But the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's Nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. In the third edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the second edition. 8 new stories were added. In Part 3, They Lost Nearly All. 8 stories were retained. 5 new ones were added. The fourth edition includes the 12 concepts for World Service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as followed. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed, in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. So the first part, the recovery section of the book, they have left intact. But as we're going to see in the next paragraph, they keep changing these stories to reflect the nature of the fellowship as it grows and changes. So we can write something off to the left. We can write experience, strength, and hope. Okay, experience, strength, and hope. And then you can write 56 stories from first 3 editions. So if you ever wanted to read all of the stories, you can get that book called Experience, Strength, and Hope. And that's got 56 stories from the first, second, and third edition that I think are maybe not in the fourth edition. I have it sitting on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet, I'll admit. So we're going to highlight the next 5 lines. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond nickname for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. You can stop highlighting there, and that last line, thereby to reach more alcoholics, right next to that, let's write primary purpose. Primary purpose. I mean, I didn't understand it when I first came into Code Blue because I was thinking about using every day, and I didn't know if I was going to make it or not. But they said if you come to every session and you do all the work, They said, John, and you follow this practical program of action, your obsession to drink is going to leave you, and you're going to come out of this thing, and you're going to want to go out and help other people because you're going to want to share what has happened to you. And of course, I had no idea what they were talking about at the time, but that has proven to be the case. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. So we're gonna write something too. We're gonna write a 1, 2, 3. This is the program in a nutshell, but you can just do the 1, 2, 3. Number 1 is trust God. Number 2 is clean house. And number 3 is help others. That's the program in a nutshell. 1 is trust God. 2 is clean house. And 3 is to help others. And again, it's just so important that you guys all understand that if I say something that's not in this book, you can take it or leave it alone because it's my opinion. But if it's in the book, we really recommend that you take it to heart. Okay, so we are on XIII, Roman numeral 13. Foreword to the first edition. This is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. Let's circle that big word we. Right? Circle that big word we. And you don't need to write this, but we can do what I can't do. Right? That's what it means. We can do what I can't do. And whenever they say we in the big book, in the first 164 pages, they are talking about the first 100 men and women who recovered from this disease through the working of the program. Now, the first 100 people did not have the fellowship meetings. There's great power in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and the fellowship, but the first 100 did not have that, so they all got sober by doing the program, Alcoholics Anonymous. So we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women, okay, highlight the next 4 lines, who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So stop highlighting there, and we're going to write 97 men, 3 women. 97 men, 3 women. 60 at Akron. 40 NYC, New York City. Okay? And let's go back and let's circle the word precisely. And let's circle the word recovered. Okay? Now, recovered, off to the left of recovered, let's write never cured. Right? And I sometimes will have discourses with, and it's always somebody that's been sober 30 or 40 years. Right? And when I say that I have recovered from this disease, they always want to argue with me. You know what? My book tells me that I can recover. When I came into these rooms, I could not stop drinking. And when I started drinking, I couldn't control what I took. I was miserable. I was desperate. I was physically sick, spiritually sick. I wanted to kill myself. And you know what? I have recovered from that condition. I absolutely have recovered from that. Now, I'm going to say that I'm never cured, so there are certain things that I've got to do on a daily basis to stay recovered, but I absolutely have recovered from this hopeless condition of body and mind. Absolutely. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication, circle the word authentication, and let's write valid proof. Valid proof. So convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend, highlight to the end of the paragraph, that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. So, I came into here and I had read about alcoholism, but I still, in today's day and age, I still thought that I had a weak will. I thought that I had low moral character. I thought that I was sinful. Everybody would look at me and say, "Pull yourself together, John! Come on!" Right? I thought that there was something wrong with me. And as we're going to see next week, we're going to see when we read the doctor's opinion that this is indeed, we are sick and this is a disease. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood, highlight the next 6 words, that our alcoholic work is an avocation. And after avocation, let's write volunteering/free time. Volunteering/free time. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship, highlight just the next 5 words, to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So after that we can write no last name outside of club. No last name outside of club. But believe you me, right? That's why we have phone lists. I want everybody in these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous to know that my name is John Henry, and I want them to have my phone number, because if they need to get a hold of me, I absolutely want them to be able to do that, right? So this is talking about no last name outside of the club. And and I mean at work, I don't trumpet the fact that I'm an alcoholic, but everybody, I work at a place where our home office is. I work in a store. I'm a commission salesman, and everybody in our office and everybody I work with knows that I am an alcoholic and that I go to these meetings quietly. I don't trumpet it, because I want them to know that if they know somebody that needs help, that they can come to me, because I'm going to get these people to a meeting, and I'm going to maybe set them up with a sponsor or do everything I can to help them. And if they are family members of an alcoholic, I'm going to do everything in my power to tell them that they should go to Al-Anon, right? Because this disease, it's a family disease. It affects everybody in our family. It affects everybody we work with. So when we're sick, but the people around us tend to suffer too. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. Now, the other thing too, when a celebrity comes out and says, oh yeah, I go to AA, I'm a sober guy, he's on the Johnny Carson show, or Jay Leno, or Jimmy Fallon now. Yeah, I'm an alcoholic, I go to the meetings, I'm sober. Then all of a sudden, 2 months later, you read about the guy getting drunk and crashing his car. Other people are going to see that and they're going to say, see, it doesn't work. I'm not going to go to those meetings. So we have to be very careful with this anonymity thing. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no dues or fees whatsoever. Put a 7 above that. Tradition 7. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. Put a 3 above that and circle the word honest. Now they removed that word honest from the tradition because a lot of members coming into these rooms said, I don't honestly know if I can tell you that I want to stop drinking, right? So they took that word honest out of the 3rd tradition, but they still have it in the foreword of the 1st edition. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, 10, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. Highlight the next 3 lines. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. And circle work with other alcoholics. And then we should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed. Alcoholics Anonymous. So underneath Alcoholics Anonymous, my sponsor had me write, must work with others. Must work with others. And for me, that's particularly true. I really have to stay active in this program so that I stay sober, right? And so that I can have a good life. Now also, and you don't need to write this, but Bill Wilson got sobered, and we're gonna read a little bit about him coming up, and we're gonna read his story in 2 weeks. But in the first 6 months, Bill Wilson ran around New York trying to help everybody he could, and nobody got sober the first 6 months that he tried to help people. Nobody got sober till he met Dr. Bob in Akron 6 months after he got out of the hospital. So, forward to second edition. Figures given in this foreword describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at its destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered. Circle the word recovered again. There it is again.
John?
Yep.
Is the 6,000 groups, is that fellowship? Is that actual meetings?
That's meetings, yep, as of 1955. So circle recovered, and then draw a little arrow and write the words, they have done the work. They have done the work. You know, I used to think that if I went to enough meetings that this thing would rub off on me. And I heard a lot of people say, John, just don't drink and go to meetings and you'll be fine. And I tried that for years. I tried not drinking and just going to meetings, but I never did any of these actions, and that advice almost killed me. Right? It wasn't until I finally had somebody take me through this book and I did the work that I had a life-changing experience, and I lost the obsession to drink. But, an added bonus is I stopped hating everybody and stopped hating myself, and I lost a lot of my fears. And what I gained was a little bit of happiness, some serenity, and a genuine willingness to work with other people. So that happened after I did the work, right? For years I thought all I had to do was go to meetings, and that just didn't work for me. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and in all of the provinces of Canada. AA is flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning. Only the augury, right? Augury is omen, foretelling, prediction. Only the augury of a much larger future ahead. I mean, little could they know what was going to happen with this program and this fellowship. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk, highlight to the end of the page, between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. So at the bottom of the page we're going to write Bill Wilson, he's the New York stockbroker, and Dr. Bob Smith. Dr. Bob Smith is obviously the Akron physician. Now we're being pretty good when we call Bill a New York stockbroker. He was a stock speculator, and his job was to sell stuff to people, right? But he did quite well until the disease almost killed him. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual, keep highlighting the next two lines, experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. So, off to the left, you can circle friend, and you can write Ebby Thatcher. Ebby Thatcher. I'm going to talk a little bit about him too, but Ebby Thatcher got involved with a group called the Oxford Group, and he sobered up. He was a drinking buddy of Bill Wilson's from his school days, and Bill Wilson always said that if I ever get as bad as Ebby Thatcher, I'm going to quit drinking, right? Well, Ebby Thatcher showed up at Bill's house, and Bill couldn't believe it, but Ebby Thatcher had been sober for 2 months. Right? And at the time when Ebby Thatcher went out, so don't let anybody tell you that you can't sponsor people till you've been sober. You can't reach your hand out till you've been sober for a year, because if Ebby Thatcher hadn't have gone to Bill after 2 months, we wouldn't be sitting right here right now. I would probably be dead. So we go out and we try to help other people just as soon as we think that we have something to offer, just as soon as we think that we can. And Bill was drunk when Ebby Thatcher went out and 12-stepped him. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, and that's the guy who helped 50,000 alcoholics, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. Highlight the next line. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Highlight that, and then off to the left, write medical diagnosis. Medical diagnosis. Okay? Now, you don't need to write any of this down, but in the summer of 1933, Bill went into the town's hospital, and Dr. Silkworth removed him from alcohol. And Dr. Silkworth told Bill, he said, Bill, your drinking is not due to poor moral character. It's not due to weak willpower, nor is it sinful. He said, Bill, you have developed a physical allergy to alcohol. When you put it in your body, you trigger a phenomenon of craving, and it's impossible for you to control the amount you take, right? And so Dr. Silkworth said, Bill, you can never safely drink alcohol again, right? And then he went on further. He said, Bill, when you are sober, you have an obsession of the mind, and the obsession of the mind takes over, and it does not matter how badly you want to stop drinking. From time to time, the obsession of the mind is going to overcome all ideas to the contrary, and it's going to tell you that it's okay to drink. And once you start drinking, the craving takes over and you end up drunk all over again. So he said, Bill, because of your body you cannot drink, but because of your mind you can't stay sober. He said, Bill, you are absolutely powerless over this disease called alcoholism. And this is the first time that anybody had ever told Bill that. And now the knowledge of this disease we're going to see, so Bill now knows what his problem is, but we're going to see that just because he knew what it was, that wasn't enough to keep him sober, right? So now when Ebby Thatcher arrived at Bill's apartment, Ebby Thatcher said, Bill, the doctors, the ministers, the psychologists, right, they're not going to be able to help you because that's only human power. He said, Bill, you are going to need a power greater than human power. He said, I belong to a group called the Oxford Groupers, and they have told me that if I find a higher power, that I'm going to overcome my alcoholism. And he went on further. He said, they have given me a practical program of action that will guarantee that I will find that power greater than myself that will relieve my alcoholism. So now all of a sudden, when Ebby Thatcher goes out to Bill's house, Bill has three things that he's going to need, right? He knows what the problem is. He got that from Dr. Silkworth. He knows what the solution is, right? That's a power greater than himself. He got that from Ebby Thatcher, and he knows how to get that power. Ebby Thatcher gave him the practical program of action that he got from the Oxford Groupers. So all through the first 164 pages, the way Bill writes, he's going to lay it out for us. He's going to give us over and over again, he's going to give us the problem, he's going to give us the solution, and he's going to give us the practical program of action to get that solution, right? And again, basically they're the 12 steps, right? And the instructions for working are in this book. So for all those 20 years that I came into these rooms thinking all I had to do was attend meetings and I was going to get better, no, man, I didn't understand that I had to take these actions. I didn't understand that I needed a power greater than human power, and I didn't know that there was a program of action to find that power until some guys saw that I was dying and they took me through this book.
John.
Yeah.
Phew. Boy, I cut in. Charges. Okay, real quick. Okay, as far as the obsession and the physical allergy and everything else,
yep.
And when Dr. Silkworth was telling Bill, can you just, he had said that as far as his mind, he can't stay sober, and that little part there.
Yep, he said once you take a drink,
yeah.
It triggers the phenomenon of craving, and it's impossible for you to stop. and so you can never safely drink alcohol. And he also said when you're sober, the obsession of the mind takes over, and it does not matter how badly you want to stop drinking. From time to time, this obsession of the mind is going to overcome all ideas to the contrary, and it's going to tell you it's okay to drink. We are going to cover this in depth next week.
Okay.
Yep, we're going to cover the doctor's opinion, which, and I'll talk about this. Funny enough, the doctor's opinion used to be on page 1, but for some reason in the second edition, and nobody can, or at least I haven't been able to figure out why, they moved it to the Roman numerals. And we're going to see that knowing what's wrong with us is vital to our recovery. Knowing it isn't going to be enough to get us sober, but knowing it is going to help us with step 1. So it's going to be absolutely vital that we look at that doctor's opinion in depth next week. But basically, he said because of your body you can't drink, and because of your mind you can't stay sober. You're absolutely powerless over alcohol. So, all right. So. Where did I leave off? Anybody tell me?
From the doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of the alcoholism. That was the last thing we highlighted. I think that's
Yep, and is now accounted no less than medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next page. Yep, okay. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, above that right 4, or step 4. Confession of personality defects, above that right 5. Restitution to those harmed, 9, above that. Helpfulness to others, above that 12. And the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God, after that right 2, 3, and 11. Whenever I give you numbers, they're going to be steps unless I say they're the traditions. Prior to his journey to Akron, highlight the next 4 lines. The broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. So off to the left, let's write, if you help other alcoholics, you will stay sober. If you help other alcoholics, you will stay sober. Now again, Bill, we're going to see in Bill's story that he had a white light experience at the town's hospital, and he got out of that hospital and he ran around all New York pulling people off of bar stools, pulling them up out of the gutter. And what he would say, you've got to have this white light experience. You've got to find your higher, you've got to find God, and you're going to get better. And he went around for 6 months, and not a single person was able to stay sober. And right before he left to Akron, he went to his wife Lois, and he took a look at Lois, and he saw her wearing a threadbare sweater, and he looked at her and he said, Lois, you know, I haven't been a good husband. You're out there working at Macy's. We don't have any money. He said, I'm not helping anybody. Enough is enough. I've tried like the dickens to get people to stay sober, and I haven't had any luck. I'm going to go out to Akron on this business venture, and I'm going to start making money, and I'm going to support you the way I should, because nobody's staying sober. Lois looked at Bill, and she changed the course of history, because she looked at him and she said, Bill, you stayed sober, right? Bill hadn't put that together. Then, just before he was about to go to Akron on this business venture, he went back to see, she said, go see Dr. Silkworth. He went back to see Dr. Silkworth, and Dr. Silkworth said, Bill, you're telling everybody about the big white light experience and how they got to find God. Why don't you do for them what I did for you? Why don't you tell them about the grave nature of alcoholism, that about the craving and about the obsession that they're probably going to die? Why don't you start with that? And then you can go to the other stuff. So I think that it was no coincidence that he got that little advice from Dr. Silkworth just before he was about to leave for Akron and meet our other founder, Dr. Bob Smith. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. Highlight to the end of the paragraph. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must, we're going to circle all the musts too, so circle must, carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. So we all know the story, you know. Oh, by the way, off to the left we can write National Rubber Machine Company. So when Bill was 6 months sober, you know, people said, hey, you've been sober, we're going to send you out there in this proxy fight, and if you're successful, you get to be president of this company. So Bill went out to Akron, and the whole business venture collapsed, and all of his friends took off, and Bill was pacing up back and forth in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, and he realized he only had $10 in his pocket, not even enough to pay his bill. And Bill's pacing back and forth, and all of a sudden waves of self-pity started just going over him. And all of a sudden, you know, he looks down one side and he sees a bar. You know, and I can imagine that there's soft music, there's gay laughter, there's the tinkling of ice in glasses, and he looks in there and he's like, oh my God, you know, those are my kind of people. I'm going to go in there and scrape up an acquaintance, and I'm just going to have a ginger ale, right? And all of a sudden, Bill realized, he said, oh my God, if I go in there, I am going to get drunk, right? So he had been... he had a sane thought in his head. Every other time that Bill had that thought, that was the obsession trying to creep in, Bill had succumbed to it. But this time he didn't, right? He walked to the other edge and he saw a phone booth, and he grabbed it, and he remembered that when he tried to help other alcoholics in New York, his wife Lois said, you stayed sober. So he started calling ministers trying to get an alcoholic to help. And by the time he was on his 10th call, he got a hold of somebody, and this person referred him to a woman named Henrietta Seiberling. And Bill called up Henrietta Seiberling, and I mean, the way the story goes, she caught it on the last ring right before he was going to hang up. And he said, look, I'm a fella from New York, and I think I've got a possible cure for alcoholism. Do you know anybody I can help? Now, Henrietta Seiberling was in the Oxford group, and there was Dr. Bob Smith was too, and they had all been praying for Dr. Bob Smith. All of them had been praying for a miracle for Dr. Bob. And so when she picked up the phone and this guy was on the other end, she wasn't surprised. She said, oh, this is the answer to our prayers. She goes, I've got just the fella for you. And the fella turned out to be Dr. Bob Smith. The physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue, underline, the spiritual remedy, just that, for his malady, underline the word malady, with a willingness, underline willingness, he had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no alcoholic could. So, you know, Henrietta Seiberling called out there to Dr. Bob's house, and I think it was the day before Mother's Day, and Dr. Bob had just gotten back with a potted plant for his wife, and he was drunk underneath the table, and his wife said, well, Bob can't talk right now, he's passed out under the table. And so they set it up for the next day for them to meet. And so when Dr. Bob woke up the next day, you can imagine that he was sick and hungover and tired, and he said, I'm not going. And they fought back and forth, and finally Dr. Bob said, okay, I'm going to go and I'll listen to this guy for 15 minutes. So they went out to the guest house at Henrietta Seiberling's place, and they went into a room and they started talking, and they came out 4 hours later. Now, Dr. Bob thought that Bill was going to talk to him about Dr. Bob's drinking, right? Pull yourself together, Bob. You know, do this, do that. But Bill didn't do that. Bill talked about Bill's drinking, and from that, Dr. Bob understood what was wrong with him. So from this, two things that are vital to this program came about. The first was that it's a program of identification. One alcoholic sharing their stories with another alcoholic will affect the guy or woman like nothing else. And strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, is critical to us staying sober. So they talked, and remember, you know, everybody thinks, oh, Dr. Bob went out there to save, or Bill went out there to save Dr. Bob, right? Bill went out there to save Bill, because he knew he was going to get drunk. And he said, if I don't go out there and help somebody, I'm a dead man. And so that's originally what he did, is he went out there to save Bill. And again, he talked about Bill Wilson's drinking, and that's why Dr. Bob could sit and listen to him. So this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. And that's because other people don't understand. You know, when our wives or our husbands or our girlfriends say, pull it together, man, you got to stop, you know, that's not going to have the same depth and weight as when we meet with somebody and they tell what happened to them, right? Because we understand. Let's highlight the next to the end of the paragraph. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And then let's go back and let's underline strenuous work, vital, and permanent recovery. And after recovery, let's write life and death deal. Life and death deal, right? And then under permanent recovery, write no half measures. No half measures. So since I've sobered up, I've been sober a little over 5 years, and I got to tell you guys, man, this one guy went out, he couldn't take it, he hung himself. Another guy dead of liver failure on his apartment floor. Another gal dead in a car wreck. I mean, it just goes on and on. This, don't make no bones about it, this is a deadly disease, right? And, you know, if you don't think you're in danger now, I got to tell you, you keep on drinking. I mean, this is a deadly disease. We've got to understand that. And again, you know, this no half measures, I always thought I could go to these meetings and I could take what I wanted. I would hear people say, take what you want and leave the rest. So I would say, well, all I got to do is listen, then I ain't going to take anything. And that availed me nothing. Hence, the two men set to work, highlight almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Just that little phrase. So I'm sorry. Let's go to the bottom of page XVI, and let's write June 10th, 1935. June 10th of 35. Dr. Bob. You can just write that's Dr. Bob's sober date. That's also AA's birthday. June 10th, 1935. Because that's again, that's when there were two alcoholics, right? So that's also AA's birthday. And after June 10th, 35, Dr. Bob write 12 stepping in 10 days. 12 stepping in 10 days. So Bill and Bob realized that they had better go out and start helping other people right away. And so 10 days later, we're going to see that they went to the hospital to help another alcoholic. Right? So again, man, people used to tell me, they'd say, John, you know, don't do your fourth or fifth step till you've been sober a year. That's bad advice. They said, don't you go out and help anybody till you've been sober for a good long time, and that's bad advice too. We can go out and we can start helping people again right when we think we've got something to offer, which could be day one, for heaven's sakes. So 12 stepping in 10 days. In the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. Underline AA number 3, and off to the right, write Bill Dotson, D-O-T-S-O-N, Bill Dotson, and you can write June 20th, 35. June 20th, 35. They went out there, you know, Dr. Bob called up the hospital and he said, hey, you got anybody out there we can work with? We think that we've got a possible cure for alcoholism. And the nurse said, well, Dr. Bob, the first thing she said is, Dr. Bob, have you tried it on yourself? Because everybody knew he was a drunk. And he said, well, as a matter of fact, I have. And she said, come on out. We've got somebody that's been in and out of here many times, and he just beat up a nurse, and that was Bill Dotson. Whenever you see the picture in AA rooms of the man in the bed, that is a rendition of Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson meeting with Bill Dotson, AA number 3, on June 20th, 1935. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, underline just this little phrase, the first AA group had actually been formed. You can write King School Group. King School Group. Though no one realized it at the time. All right, I just had something in my head, but it flitted out. Okay. A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. Okay? Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, just underlined by late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety, underlined substantial sobriety. Okay, so off to the right, we're going to write 2.5 years sobriety. Right? That was unheard of. That was unheard of. I mean, we alcoholics have been suffering and dying for thousands of years up until this point. And for people to have 2 years of sobriety, and not only that, but a group of them, was absolutely unheard of. I would venture to say a miracle. Time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. Okay, so what happened is Bill went back to Akron in 1937, and he met with Dr. Bob, and they counted noses, and they figured out that there were 40 people who had stayed sober. And they said, "My God, I think we've got something here. We have got something." And they said, "We've got to figure out if 40's enough, or are we going to keep it, or are we going to give it? What the heck are we going to do?" So they had the first, what I would call the first group conscience meeting, and there were 18 members. I believe it was at Dr. Bob's house, and they made a few decisions that night. The first thing they decided they were going to do is they were going to build a chain of hospitals across the country where any alcoholic could walk into to get detox from alcoholism. Because in the 30s, 40s, and even 50s, doctors did not like alcoholics, and they had to lie to get people into hospitals. So they were going to build a chain of hospitals. Never mind that this was in the middle of the Depression and nobody had 2 cents. They were also going to hire a group of missionaries that were going to go out across the country and start bringing people to get detoxed, right? And then the third thing they decided they were going to do is they were going to write a book, because they realized that this little program that they had come up with was going word of mouth, and already it was becoming changed. It was not, the original, what they figured out to do that first summer was becoming garbled, and people were changing it. They said, "We have got to get this down on paper to save it for all future posterity." And they figured that they were going to use the profits from the book to open the chain of hospitals and to hire the missionaries to go out. And that's the first break AA caught, is that the book didn't make a lot of money. So they weren't able to do the hospitals, and they weren't able to hire the missionaries. But they did make a decision to write the book. And what they did is they said, "Bill, you've been sober longer than anybody. You're going to write this book. But every time you finish a chapter, you're going to submit it to the people in Akron and the people in New York, and we're going to read it. We're going to recommend changes, and then you're going to put those changes in the chapters, because, Bill, this is our book. It's not your book." Right? And so that's how this whole thing about writing the book came about. So Bill started writing when he was 2.5 years sober in 1937. Incidentally, when you think about Bill Wilson, he completed the book. Bill Wilson did not know enough to write this book. There's no way on earth. He wasn't a psychologist, a psychiatrist. He wasn't a member of the clergy. I mean, he did not know enough to write this book, and yet it got written. Right? So, a lot of us, I got to think that this was absolutely inspired, the actions that he wrote it. The determination bore fruit in the spring of... some names that they tried, by the way, for the book. Some names they came up with were The Way Out, Comes the Dawn, 100 Men, but then a few women joined it, so they couldn't say 100 men and 2 women. The Bill W. movement, but they shot that down right away. The Way Out, they actually sent somebody to the Library of Congress and discovered there were 13 other books called The Way Out. So finally somebody said, well, we're Alcoholics Anonymous, why don't we call the book Alcoholics Anonymous? And that's how they came up with it. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership then reached about 100 men and women. So it started with 40, but by the time the book was done, there were 100. And there was actually a third group in Cleveland. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Oursler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 18 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. Highlight, little sentence there to the end of the paragraph. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. So you can write 4 years old. We're 4 years old at that point. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires, inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Okay, highlight the next 4 lines. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. You can stop highlighting there. So a couple of things happened. You know, when they got involved with John D. Rockefeller, Dr. Bob was about to lose his house. Bill Wilson was about to be evicted. So they thought, oh my God, we got a meeting with Rockefeller, our problems are over. You know, because this guy, he had, I mean, by the time he came along, all he had to do was, his whole life was about giving away the money, right? So they thought they were in and they were saved. So John D. Rockefeller, you know, when they said, hey, you know, can you help us out? John D. Rockefeller said, you know, if I give you guys a lot of money, it's going to spoil this thing. He was that we caught another break, because he was absolutely right. So what he did do, though, is he did put $5,000 in a bank account, and he let Bill and Bob pull out like $25 a week or something like that, so that they could continue the work. But he did not give us the money that Bill and Bob wanted. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. So off to the left, too, let's write 2218 First Avenue. Okay, 2 guys, you don't need to write, just write 22 First Avenue. That's a wonderful, beautiful mansion in downtown Minneapolis. In 1940, 2 sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see the football game between Minnesota and Michigan, I believe on November 9th, and they got stuck in the Armistice Day blizzard of November 11th and 12th. Everything was shut down and they couldn't get out of town. They 12-stepped a guy by the name of Pat Cronin, and so he's the first Minnesotan. Write that down, Pat Cronin. You can write first Minnesotan. So they had his name, but they were going to see the game and leave, but because of the blizzard, they got trapped in Minnesota, so they went and saw Pat Cronin, 12-stepped him. Pat Cronin got sober, and he started 2218 First Avenue, which is the longest continuously operating Alano club in the world.
Oh.
In the world. And there might be a club in New York that was going before that and then stopped and started up again, but this is the longest. If you have never been there, there are meetings there around the clock. It's a grand old mansion. You've got to go check it out. There's meetings 7 days a week around the clock. But he started 2218 and he had that baby paid off pretty quick. Pat Cronin. Our society, okay, underline that again.
and we're going to write capitalized deity. You know, again, people that come in that have a problem with God, they can use the group as a higher power. Now, our book is going to tell us, and my sponsor told me, he said, you had better find a God or you are going to be a dead man. That's what my sponsor told me. But people that have a problem with God, we can start out by using the group as our higher power. But our book's going to tell us that we're going to be willing to consider something greater than that as well. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AA had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the steam. After pass off the steam, write traditions. Traditions. Okay? As we discovered the principles, highlight the word principles, by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society. See, it's capitalized again. That our leaders might serve but never govern. That each group ought to be autonomous. And that there was to be no professional class of therapy. These are all the traditions, by the way. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. So 2 things, guys. The Oxford group, they got into public controversies and they ultimately failed. They completely passed off the scene. But there was another group called the Washingtonians. And in the early 1940s, Bill was getting letters from all these groups telling about how everything was falling apart. And somebody wrote him a letter and says, this sounds like the Washingtonians. And Bill had never heard about the Washingtonians. So he went to the Library of Congress and looked them up. In the early 1940s, around Washington, D.C., one alcoholic helping another alcoholic, these guys within a couple of years grew to 150,000 members, right? One alcoholic helping another. And they did not have phones, computers, or anything. And but all of a sudden, you know, there was a really important election, much like the one we have coming up, and there were people trying to outlaw booze. And they got involved in elections. They got involved in trying to outlaw alcohol, and they got involved in religion. And within 1 year, that group was dead. All 150,000 members gone, and most all of them died drunk. They got involved in public controversies. They got away from the primary purpose, and they failed. And that was happening to AA, Bill saw. That's why he came out with these traditions, and he became a very unpopular fellow when he did. But that's essentially why he published the 12 and 12, was to force the traditions on the fellowship so that we could stay together. This was the substance of AA's 12 tradition, which are stated in full on 561 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted, underline the next 3 lines, accepted by the 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. I mean, when they were trying to decide where to have the first conference, there was so much disharmony in AA that the groups in New York and the groups in Akron, they were fighting, so they had to go to a neutral place, which was Cleveland, to have the first conference. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets our society has. So people jokingly say that the steps keep us from suicide, the traditions keep us from homicide. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were 2 principal reasons. Underline 2 principal reasons, and put a big 1 in front of the So the first one is the large numbers of recoveries, and then put a 2 in front of reunited homes. So those were the 2 big reasons. So all of a sudden, people are recovering for the first time and homes are being put back together, right? Because remember, guys, this is a family disease. It affects everybody, not just us. I came in here and I said, oh, I'm the only guy I was hurting, right, by this? Well, no, that's not true. These made their impressions everywhere. Okay, this is really important. We're going to highlight the next 4 lines. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses. And among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Stop highlighting there. So next to that, what we just highlighted, we're going to write worked all 12 steps. Right? That isn't going to 90 meetings in 90 days, but going to 90 meetings in 90 days can help support us while we work the steps, right, and have a life-changing experience. But that's 75% of the people who came in and did the work. Now today, how many people, those of you that have been going to meetings for a while, how many hundreds of people, thousands do you see show up and you never see them again, over the course of a year? I mean, I don't know what most groups get. We're lucky if we can get 10%. Maybe we're lucky if we get 5%. And I think that's because we've largely become a non-drinking society and people are thinking that the fellowship is enough and we've gotten away from doing the work. And I got to tell you, if you're a real alcoholic, the only way we're going to have long-term sobriety is by doing the work in this book. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends, underlying ministration of friends. In other words, they're sending people to AA. Friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view. Highlight the next 2 lines. Though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as with the men of religion. I came into these rooms and I'm like, yeah, those doctors don't know anything, and those religious guys, they're horrible. Look at them, And once my mind became open, I can come to see where anybody can be saying something that can help me. Anybody, right? Once we get our mind to open up and we become teachable. Alcoholic being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America, and in distant lands the same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. And that's, they got to keep changing those stories to keep up with the way the fellowship is changing. It used to be just a bunch of middle-aged white men, right? At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem in all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. Yet it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer, highlight the last 2 lines, may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. Right? So they're talking about the instructions that we are going to go through and do in Code Blue. So we're going to write some stuff. We're going to write some stuff under that. Let's write cake mix theory. Cake mix theory. And I put a colon after that, the cake mix theory. Basic text equals sobriety and good life. And what that's referring to, cake mix theory, basic text equals sobriety and good life. So, if somebody bakes a chocolate cake and I try a piece of that chocolate cake and I say, my God, that's the best cake I've ever had, could you please give me the recipe for that? The person, if they're a good guy, they'll sit down and they'll write out that recipe, right? But here I am, I got my keen intellectual mind here, right? My alcoholic mind, and I'm going to look at that recipe and I'm going to say, you know what? Instead of 4 eggs, I'm going to put 6 because I like it fluffier. Oh, I got a sweet tooth. Instead of 3 cups of sugar, I'm going to go 5. You know, he didn't ask for walnuts or vanilla in the recipe, but I know I use them for cookies. That's going to make it taste better. And I'm going to bake it for an hour and a half instead of 45 minutes. And you know, what comes out of the oven is going to look like a cake, but it is not going to be the same kind of cake. And that's what we're doing. People are coming in and they're saying, well, you don't need to do this, you don't need to do that, you don't need to do this. Take what you want and leave the rest. And all of a sudden, you know, we're not getting the full benefit of this life-changing experience like it was originally set down for us to have. So we're going to write something else. We're going to write, meetings are for fellowship. Meetings are for fellowship. Steps are for recovery. Steps are for recovery. And I'll repeat it. Program of AA is working steps with people. Meetings are for fellowship. Steps are for recovery. Program of AA is working steps with people. And as I was taught, right, because everything in here, you know, other than when I share about my personal story, is stuff that I was taught by people who have gone before me. I mean, we've got giants in recovery that have gone before us and have left us this, you know, it says they blazed a trail for us to follow. And when we sponsor people, we take them through the book and we do the steps with the sponsee that we're helping, and we work the steps again with our sponsee as we're going through it. And the whole idea about Code Blue, you know, we come in here and we're suffering, we got the obsession, we might be dying, but we work these steps, we have a life-changing experience, and then we go out and we share this with somebody else. Meetings are for fellowship, steps are for recovery, program of AA is working steps with people. And I also wrote, do what they did, you get what they got. Right? So if we do what the first 100 people did, we're going to get what they got. And they, you know, that first summer when they were working in Akron, they had a lot of failures. They had a lot of failures, and we gotta remember the people that they failed with, and because a lot of people died. A lot of people didn't get it, and I think Bill and Bob learned as much from their failures as they did from their successes. But what they did is when they worked with somebody and something worked, they kept it. When it didn't work, you know, and they saw it didn't work, they would discard it. And that's how they came up with these actions that they got. You know, if I have time, we're going to actually, I'm going to read forward to the 3rd edition real quick. By March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. Among newer members, the proportion is nearly 1/3. 7% of AAs surveyed are less than 30 years of age, among them many in their teens. The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. The 12 steps that summarize the program. Underline that. The 12 steps that summarize the program, okay, that means when you look at the steps on the wall, that's a summary. We've got the instructions in the first 164 pages. So the 12 steps that summarize the program may be called Los Dos Pasos in one country, Les 12 Étapes in another, but they trace exactly the same path to recovery, there it is, that was blazed, underline the word blazed, by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. They went out right away and started working with people. In spite of the great increase in the size and span of this fellowship, at its core it remains simple and personal. Highlight to the end. Each day somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. Okay, we're almost done. I just want to tell you guys that what happened when they started sending, the salesman took this book out across the country. The book made it to California, out to Arkansas, to Minnesota. People read what it said, they did what it said, and they recovered, and they started groups. they started Alcoholic Anonymous groups. And back in 1939 and the early 40s, the program and the fellowship were exactly the same. But all of a sudden, with all these groups springing up everywhere, people started to realize that there was tremendous power when people came together to share and overcome a common problem. And many people realized that they could stay sober just by going to a lot of meetings, right? So all of a sudden, people are saying, well, you know, maybe I don't have to do an inventory and share everything with another person, right? Maybe I don't have to ask God to remove all my defects of character. Maybe I don't have to go out and make amends to everybody that I harmed. And pretty soon the fellowship and the program started to separate, right? So what we're going to try to do here in Code Blue is we're going to try to get back to the original program as it was, right? As it was before the fellowship, before people started to think that they'd be able to stay sober just by going to meetings. And you know what? Even if you can, and it's always the old duffer that's got 35 years, you know, and he always says, I never worked a step in my life, God damn it, right? Never, right? And you know what? Even if that's true and you manage to stay sober, you're missing so much if you don't do them. So we are going to end with the third step prayer. And that is on page, we end every meeting with a third step prayer. Middle of the page on page 63. If you can get on a knee, get on a knee, but you don't have to. So page 63, middle of the page, where it says we were now at step 3. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Peace. Thanks.